this presentation about managing or how to manage a late spring, which is certainly what we're dealing with on farm at the moment. So I'm joined by Phil Vangeli from the Penwith Landscape Partnership. Hi, Phil.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is, some of you might be watching this, but also we're going to try and record this so anyone listening can follow along as well. So if there's any pictures or graphs that we're sharing, we'll describe those in good detail, and hopefully you'll find this useful. Just to give you some hints and tips on how to cope with what I say has been a very late spring, been cold for most of April. It's also been dry. We think the dry is going to change, but yeah, there's a lack of feed on farm, so hopefully we can give you some advice on how to best manage that, so it doesn't compromise stock performance in the short term, and you still have a successful farming year and go and make the most of these tremendous sort of lamb, beef, and in some cases milk prices that we're receiving this year. So without further ado, I'll be sharing my screen for those of you that are watching. Yeah, Phil, can you see that okay?
Yep, I can see that fine. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So got a presentation that's maybe split into three parts. Just going to do a little bit of theory around grazing management and feed management, look at the current position, and then we're going to go into a section about some hints and tips, and we'll break that down into ewes and lambs, sucklers and dairy, and we're just going to talk about sort of how do you work out what supplementary feed to feed, what are the options for feeding it, and then we'll also have a little section where we think ahead, what are we going to do on farm to get through the next 2 or 3 weeks. So to start with a bit of background and context, if you're listening to this and you're a farm manager or farm owner, so you look after livestock and you've got access to some land, then a way to think about your role is sort of really at a top level is that your role is to supply the right quantity, that's the amount, and quality of feed to the animals at the right time. So why do we do that? Well, if we've gone out and paid good money for good genetics, we won't see the benefit of those genetics unless the animals fed the right amount of feed of the right quality at the right time. So really essential to drive good animal performance is getting that situation, that balance right. And now, if every year is the same, if we had the same grass growth curve and the same weather, then that would become much, much easier. But yeah, as we found out the last few years, that unfortunately isn't the case. So it means you're going to be really good on your management to balance out these peaks and troughs we see with the season. So current situation on farm is that during the spring, we'd always expect for farm cover, so farm covers the amount of grass on farm, we'd always expect that to be falling during April, and then at some point in April, we hit Magic Day. And Magic Day is when the farm demand, or when farm supply, so that's normally grass growth, matches farm demand. And farm demand is the demand from the animals that are on the farm. It normally happens in April, and I think for some farms it probably happened last week, but for many farms, including dairies, then they've yet to see that Magic Day point being reached, which is surprising because we'd expect most dairy farms to have hit that day somewhere between the sort of 1st and 3rd week of April. And here we are.
I was chatting to my dad, and my dad's 84, and he says it's the latest spring he's ever known. So there were.
Yeah, we're definitely tracking. We were two weeks behind average, and we're probably pushing 3 to 4 weeks behind now. So what it's meant is that the farm cover, amount of grass on farm, has sort of continued to drop, which is not unusual in April, but we've yet to really see that turn around in most cases. Certainly say it's the case in dairy farms or anyone that's sort of we class as medium to highly stocked. So danger of that is, well, as farm cover drops, we have less leaf area on farm, so our potential to grow grass is also reduced. And that means we start to grow less, and then also the amount of feed available to feed our stock is reduced as well. And the issue in spring is that we've got a lot of animals on farm that maybe just lambed or calved, and therefore their demand for grass, particularly high protein, high energy grass or feed, is really high. And we need to support those animals so that they can produce the most amount of milk that they can genetically, so that we can get the most milk in the season or the heaviest lambs or calves at weaning. So feed shortages in the spring can have the issue or potential to sort of hit us or to cause us some financial or to reduce our output later in the season. So it's pretty key to keep on top of it and to use good management to avoid it, a short-term problem turning into a long-term issue. So yeah, what are our aims in spring? Well, as I said, that key aim is that to recognise we've got animals that may have lambed and calved in the last anywhere from week to 3, 4, even 6 weeks, and straight after lambing or calving, their demand for energy, for feed, goes up very quickly, and as they get towards peak lactation. And the issue with peak lactation is that the amount of milk they produce when they're at peak, and for sheep, it takes 3 weeks after they've lambed to be at peak lactation. For cows, it's 8 weeks or 50 to 60 days. The amount of feed they receive at that point, so the point at which they reach their peak lactation, sets how much milk they produce for the rest of that lactation curve. So, for example, a situation where a ewe was underfed 3 weeks after lambing, and maybe also in a poor body condition, even if her feed dramatically improved 4 or 5 weeks later, her peak or her lactation potential has already been set. So for that ewe in particular, she doesn't produce as much milk as she could have done after lambing, and therefore her lambs will be lighter at weaning. And it's that light lamb at weaning, or that light calf, or that cow not producing the milk that she could do, which can start to have an impact later in the year.
Yep.
So spring aims is to ensure that all stock are fed high quality feed at their peak, or to enable them to reach peak. Also, we're looking to monitor and then protect or maintain animal body condition, because if we don't monitor that now, and if we're not prepared to take action, again, we could end up, when we come to wean, either wean ewes, or we come to sort of mate our dairy cows, or we come to wean our suckler cows.
So I guess what we're saying, James, is that these few weeks are foundational to the rest of the year, really.
Yeah, you're setting yourself up for a good year. And there's a lot of stuff in spring. It's not the first time you graze a field, you're setting it up for good quality grass for the rest of the season. And as we said, protecting that cow body condition, or that ewe body condition, is setting her up not just for peak lactation, but also to mate, so to getting calve easily and quickly, and then that has an impact next year on calving period or lambing period. And there's lots of benefits with keeping that close and tight together. So feed stock, or feeding stock correctly at this time of year, multiple benefits. So just to look at the current position, so yeah, your father's comment there, Phil, that coldest spring he's ever known, and yeah, lots of data to say he's right. And the issue we've got with cold is that grass doesn't start growing until soil temperatures above 5 degrees, and our clovers and legumes start growing when soil temperatures above 8 degrees. And what we've seen is we've had lots of sunshine, which has been great, but we have really cold air temperatures and really cold nights. West Cornwall's had a frost. We've had probably 10, close to 12 frosts in April, which would be pretty much unheard of.
Yeah, highly unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and those frosts have really knocked the nighttime temperatures back. So, although we talk about, well, we can't wait for it to rain, and we also have a little bit of moisture. Today's Wednesday, 28th of April, so there's a little bit of rain for most people, 2 to 3 mil there last night. It's cold again, and it's really been the cold temperatures that's been holding all this potential growth back. So there's a Met Office weather station on the Lizard, it's the closest one we've got to the Penwith region, and looking at the last 30 days, starting with precipitation, there's been a total of just under or just over 5 millimeters of rain in the last 30 days. So that is quite unusual for April. But coupled with that, it's also been the much lower than average air temperature, particularly for April. It was reasonably good and probably above average or average for March. And as we get into April, we see this big swing where we've got some not too bad of days. In the sunshine's felt really warm, and that has helped warm the ground slightly. But back at night, we've been dipping well below 5 degrees. Again, seeing some ground frosts, and that's continued up to sort of the 3rd week of April. And that's pulled the average soil temperature back, and that's then limited grass growth potential. So in April, we think we would normally grow anywhere between maybe 30 to 50 kilos on most farms, assuming soil structure is reasonable and soil fertility is good. But whereas this year we've seen farms grow maybe 20 to 40, in some cases as low as 10 to 30.
Yeah. So are we a couple of degrees below normal, James?
Yeah, I think where we are probably at this point in the season, soil temperatures maybe in 3 to 4 degrees below normal.
Okay, right.
And bit of a rule of thumb, but for every 1 degree of soil temperature above 5 degrees, we should be getting 5 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. So if soil temperature is 8, and that would be 8 average for the 24-hour period, we could be growing 15 to 20 kilos. And that's kind of what we've seen. We've seen soil temperatures hovering around like 9 degrees. And so therefore our growth potential has been in the sort of 20 to 30 kilo region, whereas we do think they'd quite often be 12 degrees, and growth potential was 30 to 40 kilos, and we're getting closer to magic day. So yes, this is all interesting, and it just that cold soil temperature I think it's been unexpected, because in the sunshine it's felt a lot warmer. And if you're lucky enough to sort of go in the house at night, you're kind of missing the real cold part of the day, and that's been dragging the average back down again.
Yep.
So that's where we are, and as we go into the next section, we just need to talk about what can we do about it. Okay, so look at some management options. And I guess the first part is to sort of recognise or to understand the supply-demand balance on farms. So we're just talking about grass growth, and we said grass growth should be 30 to 50 kilos. In reality now it's been pulled back to 20 to 30 in most cases. So how does that compare with what the demand on farm is? Well, if you know your stocking rate, so this is in terms of ewes an acre or cows an acre, then the table we're sharing with you now is a really useful lookup table to work out demand. So if we're dairy farming, we may know that our cows, spring calving cow could eat 17 kilos of dry matter per cow per day. And if we're stocked at 3 a hectare on the grazing platform, then we do 3 times 17, and we work out that we need sort of 48 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. So that's what we need to grow in order to meet the cow's demand. For sheep and beef farmers, quite often those numbers don't sort of spring to hand quite so readily. So the table I'm sharing, and we'll probably make this table available as like a simple PDF. So if you're listening, maybe follow the link and you'll be able to see the table probably in the description. All it says is that if I've got 4 ewes an acre, then my demand kilos dry matter per hectare is 24 kilos. So there's a reasonable chance this week that I might be finally growing the grass I need. If I've got some beef suckler cows and I'm stocked at a cow an acre, quite often the case, my demand is 36 kilos per hectare, 36 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. That's probably more than I'm actually growing. So that's when we start to think about what supplement options that we need to use to fill that gap. So the issue with having a demand higher than our growth, which means the average amount of grass on farm is going to start to fall. And if it falls too far, we're reducing our growth potential, just less leaf area on farm, less solar panels to capture that light. And it also starts to means we're underfeeding livestock. It can't get enough grass in per day. The covers are too low. If we're underfeeding them, then we come into this issue about losing body condition and them not be able to reach their milking potential. To go with an example then, think about suckler cattle and how we might supplement those. A bale of silage, 650 kilos fresh weight. So if you picked it off the ground and weighed it, mostly round bale, around 650 kilos. Say it's 40% dry matter, which most silage would be, and if it's a bale that's sort of roughly kept its shape, if it's still nearly round at this time of year, it's probably 40 to 50% dry matter. Well, that would contain 250 kilos of dry matter. So 650 kilos fresh weight, 40% of that, 250 kilos of dry matter. So that's a useful number because it kind of gives you an idea of how many bales you might need to feed to close a feed deficit. So if we had some suckler cows and calves and they were stocked at 1.2 cows an acre, the demand would be 42 kilos of dry matter per hectare. If our growth was 25 kilos, then we've got a difference or a deficit of 17 kilos to fill. So that's our difference per hectare. If we know what area is available to those cows, and we'll talk about available area in a minute, but at the moment there's 20.6 hectares available to those cows. So to work out what we need to supplement, we take the area times the deficit. So 20.6 times 17 equals 350 kilos of dry matter. And if we divide 350 by what a bale is worth, which is 250, then we get, in round numbers, 1.5 bales a day, or 7 kilos a cow. So it kind of gives you the scale of the feed deficit that a lot of farmers have been facing through April and may continue to face for the next 2 or 3 weeks. That group of suckler cows, it says 40 in that group, although they're not sort of super heavily stocked, there's still quite a big feed deficit there, equivalent to what's nearly sort of half of the cow's intake needs to come from silage if they want to hold the amount of grass they've got on those fields.
Do you think it's a good idea to perhaps consider bringing in a bit of silage grain if we need to, James?
Yeah, so as we said, though they're not super heavily stocked, if we're going to feed silage, then sometimes this can sort of be, you can incur more costs than you need to. So if we've got silage left in the yard, we're fortunate to be in that position to have that as an option, that's great. But if we've also got silage areas shut up that the cows could access, then why not let them go and graze that silage area rather than feeding silage to then make more silage? Because the cow will be the cheapest way of consuming that grass. Otherwise, you're effectively just feeding it back to her later in a different way. So yeah, it depends on the situation, but yeah, any fields that are shut up, and what we'll do a little bit later on is we'll look at sort of what's suitable heights for different stock classes, because cows are pretty good though, they can go and consume lots of different heights of forage. With sheep, the issue is a little bit more sensitive in terms of, yes, they could graze silage grain, but what if the cover's too high? What if there's too much grass? Can they really make use of it? So we'll look at those, but yeah, certainly at this time of the year and at this stage of the season, we've got a belief that most years we grow the same amount of grass. So if a farm will grow 8 tons or 10 tons or 12 tons, with the exception of 2018, we grow the same amount of grass each year. It's just when it grows that's the difference. So what we'll anticipate happening, given it's still April, we'll anticipate a massive compensatory growth period in June or in May or June or even July, when maybe it should be dry and it's actually going to be wet. So with that in mind then, because it's early in the season, we'll be happy to graze silage grounds now, because if we can maintain farm cover, then when temperatures do pick up, our farm will spring back to life really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I say that is because I guess some people have already, sort of run out of silage, perhaps, and haven't got any left from this winter.
Yeah. So yeah, if there's a shortage of if feeding forage isn't an option, because I say if you run out, then yeah, the idea, principle of sort of allocating as much area of the farm as possible. Any fields are shut for silage but could be grazed, then versus underfeeding animals that are lactating, we always take the option of feeding them fresh grass. Whether that's fresh grass and some silage to fill this deficit, whether it's just fresh grass, but getting those animals across the farm and having confidence that we'll have an opportunity to make silage later in the season, even if it's in months that you wouldn't normally consider cutting. We're early enough to think or to consider that would be an option. So yeah, so for sucklers, it could be the cows and calves, or it could be dry stock. Then yeah, have an idea, an estimate of what your deficit's going to be, so what your demand is versus your growth, and then relatively simple to work out what you need to feed to bridge that gap. And if you don't, farm cover is going to keep dropping. It's going to take longer to recover when temperatures do pick up. So a lot of this is sort of short-term pain for long-term gain, i.e. being a farm that's quick to recover and quick to grow grass again. With ewes and lambs then, it's we've got a variety of sort of lambing dates in sort of in West Cornwall. So some guys may have lambed really early and probably are thinking about weaning lambs now, and you're in receipt of a cracking lamb price if they do. Others may have lambed in the last anywhere from week to 4 weeks ago. So those that have lambed recently, then yeah, again, ewe body condition, feed for ewes and lambs, really important. Lambs start eating pasture from sort of 2 to 3 weeks of age. And so when we think about who would we supplement, if we have a deficit, do we supplement the ewe or do we supplement the lamb? Probably up to 6 weeks of age for the lamb, we'll supplement the ewe. And then after 6 weeks, we look at supplementing the lamb. And again, lamb prices look like they're reward some supplement being fed, particularly if pasture covers get really low, so that the ewe's intake's compromised. So you better spend £1,000 on feed this week to get a lamb that's heavier at weaning that can leave the farm a month earlier potentially. So short-term pain for long-term benefit. So for a reasonably typical ewe and lamb example, if we're sort of stocked around maybe that five to 6 ewes an acre at the moment, so we maybe finished lambing, or we turned out from the shed and we've got ewes and lambs in the pasture, and the ewes demand's now really high because she's at her peak. Again, if growth's less than demand, we'll see the pasture covers in those fields fall, and once grass height gets kind of below 4 centimeters, then if that ewe's got twins, she's won't be able to eat enough grass in the day to support her and support the lambs properly. So we might have a deficit. So if our demand was 40 and our growth was 25, deficit is 15 kilos a hectare. If our ewes and lambs had access to 21 hectares or 50 acres, then the deficit there is about 315 kilos. And in the example I was looking at, we had sort of 300 ewes and lambs on that area. So the deficit was about 0.9 kilos a ewe. And that's about a kilo of concentrate per ewe per day, or 4.5 kilos of fodder beet if you could get it to feed. The reason we're not really considering silage is that find that ewes will always prefer to eat grass at this time of year, and because most ewes will be at peak lactation or be after peak lactation, it's not really appropriate to try and feed a silage unless it was something that was super high quality. So you have to have a really tremendous analysis, like 12 ME plus, and high intake factor for them to kind of want to eat it. We're thinking the situation most sheep farms is that there's some grass but not enough. The ewes probably get enough protein but has a lack of energy, and so like an energy-based concentrate with a low, an average protein like a 16% protein would be sufficient to buffer those. And as we said, if lambs are up to 6 weeks old, feed the ewe. After 6 weeks, feed the lambs, and yeah, look to support them and look to get them gone early. So again, in the sheep example, the question is, could we get them on silage ground? So with that, we just have a little think about what is suitable heights for different stock classes. So what we're saying is that as well as pasture can be too short, if it's too short, they just can't eat enough per day to support what they need to do. It can equally be too long and they struggle to make use of it. And the situation we're in would be rather pasture that was too long at the minute than have pastures that were too short. But if you're looking, if you've just got sheep and you've got some fields locked up for silage, then it's saying, you know, which fields got the lower cover, you know, where is the grass kind of, you know, up to my ankle but not over my ankle, because that's the pasture where the ewes and lambs will do the best in at this time. And even if you've lambed early and you think about weaning your lambs, then targeting them onto the best pasture would be really important. So if you've got ewes on the farm as well as cattle, then you can kind of look around the farm and see where the grass is and prioritize the stock classes to the pasture heights that are the most sensible. So little thing about dairy, and you know, the curious position with dairy is that we've probably got the highest demand per hectare, and normally that's great. You know, that's perfectly appropriate because we've got a high proportion of new lays, normally quite high soil fertility. So at this time of the year, we're growing what we need, and we're starting to move into a shorter rotation. So we're talking about going around the farm once every maybe 20 to 24 days as we get into May. However, at the moment, with growth rates being low against quite a high farm demand, then that rotation lengths have to be pushed out because grass just isn't growing back quick enough before it can be grazed again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flick to annotate. So I'm just highlight some areas in the sort of table we're looking at. So for those that are listening, I've got a table here which is a screenshot from a program called AgriNet. And AgriNet's a sort of feed budgeting or grazing management program. Relatively simple to use once you've had some experience, and it's a sort of program if you're measuring your grass with something like a plate meter once a week, you can enter those values, those figures per field or paddock in, and it works out what the growth has been and then gives you some tools for working out the demand and deciding on things like rotation length and supplementary feed. So in the example we've got, daily growth's been actually 40 kilos last week. It's really important to remember when we measure pasture that we're always measuring what happened to last week. And so last week temperatures were quite high, although we didn't have any rain, we did see grass growth rates pick up. So yeah.
Yeah, there was, you know, when I was out driving around, there was a noticeable difference in only a week, really. Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. So for this farm, that's good news. Growth has picked up. But in reflection, where this farm's trying to get to is that its normal demand for this time of year would be 56 kilos per hectare, and it's had growth of 38. So farm's still very much in deficit, and certainly not in Magic Day. And also, what's the issue is that the farm cover is at 1950 kilos in round figures. So again, that's not unusual for April, but that would be the minimum we want to see the average farm cover to be at, because again, if it drops below that, less leaf area, less solar panels, and therefore our growth potential is reduced as well. So farm cover that low at the end or in April wouldn't be unusual, but by that stage we'd be looking at growth rates, you know, up into the 50s, and we'd be at Magic Day, and then the growth would be driving the farm forwards to a quick rotation. But they say that's not the case at the moment. So what's the farm doing to cope with this? Well, they're feeding 8 kilos of grass per cow, 2.5 kilos of concentrate, and then 6 kilos of silage. So there's as much or slightly more supplement going in per cow than there is actually grass. How are they achieving that? Well, the silage is being fed before the milkings, and the cows are out day and night just for management purposes. But by doing that, they're taking a bit of a hit on the residuals. So the cows are grazing much tighter. Although they're being offered enough feed, they're always preferring to eat the grass as tight as they can. So that will penalise recovery rates. And an option for everyone to consider is, if you're in this similar position with a feed deficit, whether you house at night, keep those cows housed at night. Obviously, consideration around that is just tricky this time of year, isn't it? It's a bit of extra work. It's been dry, so it's scraping out a bit of a pain depending on the system, and also, you know, in some cases, a shortage of bedding, depending on what you're using and what the housing arrangement is. But again, short-term costs to correct that, for long-term benefits. We don't keep things clean and dry and well maintained and looked after and well fed. We'll just see issues flare up in 6 weeks' time, in 8 weeks' time, and so on. So yeah, it's trying, in every respect, to try and be on it now to avoid this short-term problem, because it is only a short-term problem. Don't want it to knock performance the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's the most important bit, James, isn't it?
Yeah, there's all the issues. You know, we're so lucky. You know, in some cases, our environment, you know, we don't head into droughts, and we don't in this part of the world anyway, we don't really get big periods of snow cover. So most of this is short term. It's bloody frustrating, but it is short term. So if we can cope with it now, and we might have to spend a bit of money, but that benefit will come back. So yeah, so just have a look. I'll just clear my drawings. Great, that. So I'll go to the next slide. So what I'm sharing with everyone now is something called a pasture wedge. So it's got all of the fields or paddocks that have been measured, and they're lined up in order of height or grass cover, from the field with the most cover, most pasture in it, to the one with the least. And what we can see here is a couple of things. So I said that because they're not housing at night, the cows are trying to eat as much grass as they can. Even though the correct amount of supplements being offered, they still prefer the grass. So we can see there that residuals, so that's the grass that cows are leaving behind in the paddock, are kind of falling a bit below the target. So the cows are grazing quite tight, so below 1400, and that's just going to slow down recovery of those paddocks. And that means we've got to keep the rotation length as long as possible to account for that. And then at the other end, even on a 40-day round, our target entry covers at 2.7. But paddock covers at 2.4, so there's still feed deficit happening. And in some cases, there's something to say that, you know, more supplement or concentrate could be fed to those cows, and then this would depend on body condition score and stuff. So that's the position we're in. So we see that regrowth slow, and you know, hence the amount of supplementary feed that's going into that system to you know, try and allow those pastures to recover and get back to our target. If we look at where we're trying to get to, then just to sort of put in context of why it's important to act. Now, the pasture curve I'm showing now shows where the farm could be, or is where it's trying to get to in a normal season. So the pasture curve now has got the same fields on it, but the demand line, the blue line, has changed. And the demand line shows us what our target entry cover is. So how much grass should we be going into? So in this situation, this is our normal situation, and this is a 24-day rotation with 16 kilos of grass being fed per cow. And so that's where we hope we can get to, and where we will get to in May. But you see that's predicting, if we try to do that today, there's a big feed deficit on farms. So what would happen basically, we just go through those fields ever so quickly, and within pretty 18 days we'd have grazed off most of the farm and then have nowhere to go. So supplementary feeding, and if you're measuring grass, the situation is quite clear, and if you're not measuring, it's kind of, you're aware of it but maybe don't know the scale of it. So that supplementary feeding is really important. So maintain farm cover, support the animals, and be ready for a quick recovery, or be set up for a really quick recovery. So I think we covered some of those points with not just specific to dairy, but what buffer feed's available. Well, what feed have you got on farm? If you haven't got much silage or hay available, depending on the stock class, then can you graze your silage ground? Speak to neighbours. You sort of balance or share out feed between you. Stock class, if you've got dry stock growing cattle, hay would be fine. You're going to take a performance hit, but
are we thinking about sort of, if you've got any barren stock, perhaps selling those off to reduce the pressure, perhaps?
We are, yeah. So across all farm systems, no need for surplus stock on the farm, and obviously coal prices between beef and sheep, really good. So surplus stock off the farm now. Release extra area where you can.
I think I was reading draft cull ewes are about 150 pounds each in the paper last week.
They are, yeah. I know we always see the headlines in the paper, but no, across the board, prices are good. So shouldn't be any casualties or any surplus stock on the farm at the moment, or any passengers, I should say. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, as I say, it's always short-term situations. We'll be improving. It'll improve quickly if we sort of manage it now in the next couple of weeks. So trying to hold the amount of grass on farm. Don't want to see it dip any lower than 6 or 7 centimetres, or 1,800 kilos a hectare for sheep and beef, and then 1,950 kilos of dry matter per hectare, or probably 9 to 10 centimetres for dairy as an average across the farm. And that should allow most farms to sort of see 20 days ahead. We should have 20 days of feed ahead on the farm. In doing that, we just need to monitor things carefully. So if you haven't been across or haven't driven through every field on the farm in the last week, then good opportunity to do so. And you might be surprised where you find grass, and you just got to think about how you can get stock there. So be aware of what feed is really available across all the fields that you've got access to. Keep supplementing. In the short term, it's expensive, but it's definitely the most economical option in the long term. Review the weather forecasts and try and think in your head, what's growth likely to be? When is my magic day going to happen? And how am I going to sort of manage to make sure I get towards it. With moisture in the forecast, we can now think about using nitrogen fertilizer, if you're able to kind of get some extra to give a boost to grass growth. Now, nitrogen fertilizer hasn't done a lot for us this spring, simply because soil temperature has been so low. So it's been soil temperature that's been limiting, not the amount of nitrogen. So for nitrogen to work, it needs rain. Urea needs the most rain, needs 10 mil within 3 days. When soil temperatures are around 10 degrees, as they probably are now. So it's pretty, if you don't get the 10 mil, you're going to have a lot of losses. And that's not just bad environmentally, but it's bad for your pocket, because this isn't about trying to be organic. This is about getting an economic return from your farm inputs. So if you spent £1,000 of nitrogen, how much grass does that actually grow in you? Because for farms to be profitable, it needs to have grown you at least £2,000 worth of grass to cover the cost of the fertilizer and of the operation, and of the lime you've got to put on by using it. So ammonium nitrate or protected urea would be much more stable and need less rain to be up and to be used by the plant. However, temperatures are still low, and if grass height is low, so if pasture height's very short, then again, nitrogen is not particularly limiting. So if you're going to apply something, apply a little amount now, whilst there's moisture in the forecast, and be prepared to go back on again in 3 weeks' time with the rest of it. So again, it's not about not using nitrogen, trying to be organic. It's about efficient or effective return from farm inputs to become profitable, to be profitable. So application rates of 20 to 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, or 20 to 30 units per acre of N. And keep it at that for the first application. Be prepared to go on with more when the temperatures improve, and you'll grow more grass because of it, or through that method, than applying it all in one dose now to lose half of it. Thinking longer term, if you're low stocked, then don't apply all the N at once. So don't go out and do the whole farm, do half of it, wait 2 weeks, do the other half. And that hopefully will mean you will avoid a big surplus of grass when you don't want it end of May, June. So especially if you've got a low stocking rate and you're not looking to make a lot of silage to deal with it. So that I think that brings us to the end in particular, Phil.
Right, thank you, James. Brilliant.
Yeah, so I guess the summary points are that we discussed as we've gone through is that yeah, much colder than average. It looks like moisture can sort itself out. So if we still saw temperatures that are limiting pasture growth, then it means that for most farms are in a feed deficit and have been for a while. Issue being is that we've got lots of stock that need feed to produce lots of milk, and farm cover amount of grass is dropping. So our only way to counteract that at the moment is to, for the order of preference, so stock any passengers should go immediately. Consider what other area we can graze. So the silage fields locked up, can we reallocate them to stock, and how much grass is in those fields, what stock class would be most appropriate. Once we've done those two things, look at supplementary feeding and have an attempt or a guide as to how big is the deficit and how much supplementary feed do we need to offer, and what sources do we have on the farm, and what sources are available to us. We think that for cattle, silage, lactating animals silage, high quality silage, dry stock, we could use hay if we had to. Ewes in particular is probably need to be a concentrate, and that should go to the ewe first in the first 6 weeks, and then the lambs after that. Yeah, it is short term, the situation will get better. Try and deal with it now as effectively as possible, and when temperatures do pick up, the farm will recover really quickly. If people need further support, then they can get in touch with, I'm sure, yourself, Phil.
Yes, certainly. Yes.
Get in touch with me, and we can help with specific farm questions or budgets, or anything we might be dealing with.
And the contact details will be on the Penwith Landscape Partnership website.
Yeah, we'll make sure they're added. Okay, well, that then we will wrap up, and we'll wish everyone a warm and wet May, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Thanks, James.
Well, thanks everyone. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.